views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
And hello, everyone, and welcome to the Social Justice Forums. I'm Daren Jaime, and today we invite you to join in on our conversation. People ask what the Social Justice Forum is actually all about. Well, it's a show that brings you actually a deeper understanding into the many issues and the inequities that many people face. We also promote civic engagement, and then we also get a chance to hear multiple points of view. So we encourage you to stay tuned because the Social Justice Forums starts right now. Women Creating Change is an inclusive community partnering with people and organizations that are actually focusing on underserved women to develop and strengthen the skills and resources that are needed to effectively identify the issues, as well as the things which matter to them the most, as well as advocating for themselves and New York's diverse communities. Its vision: all women have the power to be change makers, to create a more equitable New York City, and women are uniquely positioned to be leaders in their homes, neighborhoods, and communities. But unfortunately, many primarily low-income and immigrant women face significant barriers to participation in civic life. Joining us now to provide their point of view on this matter, I'm joined by the Program and Policy Matter at Women Creating Change, Leah Giddins, and then also board member at Women Creating Change, Dayanna Torres. And thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having us. We're happy to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I think when we talk about your organization, I think right now the work is very critical, particularly addressing the issue of women, and particularly at such a time like this. And so, Leah, I'll give you a little bit to share a little bit about your program and your information.
Sure. So you kind of gave a nice intro to the work we're doing, but our focus is really on increasing civic engagement for women in New York City. We went through a strategic planning process a few years ago where we had a lot of conversations with different organizations, community leaders, and women throughout the city to find out more information about what they felt their needs were and how we could make a difference. And so the organization about a year ago actually changed its name and started with a new mission and vision really focused on civic engagement to kind of move away from our previous more membership focus to really work with more women in every part of the city. So now we work on a programmatic level as well as a policy level. So working with people, meeting them where they are, depending on how interested they are in getting engaged, how much time they have. And then we also do advocacy work around different policies that are important.
So can you break down for me the definition of civic engagement for somebody who might be watching and say, listen, I don't quite know exactly what civic engagement is. How do you define civic engagement from your perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question. We define it pretty broadly, really about getting involved in your community, whether it's in different civic processes or political processes. So it could be anything from voting, completing your census, going to a protest, volunteering, participatory budgeting, really kind of a wide number of different activities about being engaged in your community and in the city.
Dayanna, talk to me about November coming right around the corner. A lot of people are really putting the word out there, the last minute, the full court press, if you will, in regards to voting. I know that there's some voting advocacy that you guys have been engaged in too.
Absolutely. Thank you, Daren. We're really excited because this is such a timely, it's such an important time in history where, because of the pandemic, the 2020 election is very unprecedented. New Yorkers must do their research. They must have a plan to vote. We want to make sure as an organization that we are facilitating the opportunity and providing the tools and providing the information for New Yorkers to create a plan, to have a plan that will ensure that their voices are heard. And with this election, we will see that the decisions that are made in the future will impact our families and our generations to come.
And so going forward, as we talk about November coming around the corner, voting advocacy is one of the things I know that you guys are engaged in that you spoke to, Dayanna. Leah, give me a little bit more about some of the other advocacy work that's going on right now. I know the census is very important to a lot of people too.
Yeah, so our real focuses right now have been on voting in the census. We've done a lot of different education surrounding the census, putting together events, trying to encourage as many New Yorkers as possible to complete it. We've also done, we co-hosted a census ambassador training with the New York Immigration Coalition and the League of Women Voters and the New York Counts 2020 Coalition, which is really kind of a way for people to identify their own networks to get out the word about the census. So that's definitely been a focus. And then in terms of voting, we are advocating broadly for policies that would make it easier for New Yorkers to vote in 2020 and beyond. So areas like wider spread vote by mail options. But we're also a part of a coalition called Our City, Our Vote that is advocating for individuals who are not citizens to be able to vote in our local elections. So races like mayor, comptroller, public advocate. And so that's been some exciting work, and we've been focusing a lot on that.
Yeah, and when we talk about raising voices for women, I think a lot of times that is a lot of people are ignorant, I should say, to a lot of the issues that are actually plaguing women. We hear about the main ones, right? But there's so many other things when you talk about, women's advocacy and then also women's rights and really being a strong voice for that. Talk to us a little bit about raising our voice for women and some of the things that maybe we're not so familiar with that need some advocacy or need some attention.
Yeah, so I think that one of the things that we found in talking to people is that there are, well, there are obviously a lot of different issues, and they're intersectional. So a lot of people are facing a number of different issues depending on where they're located, their socioeconomic status, their race, their ability. So a lot of our work has been also trying to understand what a lot of the barriers to civic engagement are and what makes it hard for people to engage and kind of holds them back, and trying to think about our programs and our work as a way to remove some of those barriers. So we're working to set up some workshops, and we're thinking about language access, and language being also an important piece to get people involved, and thinking about family programming for women who have children, and a lot of the equal pay, a lot of issues as well surrounding women's needs.
Yeah, Dayanna, tell me a little bit more about, policy, because policy is very important, particularly in this day and age, and the shaping of policy. And so a little bit about the initiatives that you're working on the forefront with too as well.
Absolutely, Daren. Thank you. Civic engagement matters more than ever. We have 8.5 million New Yorkers, and 1 in 4 of New York City women live in poverty. As Leah mentioned, the gender equity gap, Hispanic women make, for example, 50 cents to the dollar to white men in New York City. And less than half of women in New York City are involved in the civic engagement process. Every component of the civic matters, as Leah has mentioned, creates the platform and opportunity to ensure that all women are able to leverage the resources available in their community to be able to respond to the needs that are affecting their community. So in terms of policy making, it's so important that we have representation of diverse group of women that are advocating for their rights that are affecting their health, their families, their neighborhoods, their safety, and their future, and also equity and education as well.
Can you share a little bit about Our City, Our Vote coalition?
Yeah, so the Our City, Our Vote coalition is being led by some great partners of ours, the New York Immigration Coalition, United Neighborhood Houses, and there are a lot of different organizations involved. And the goal is to advocate for a piece of legislation that was introduced by Councilmember Rodriguez. It's currently in the City Council. It has over 27 different co-sponsors. And the goal of that is to be able to expand voting rights to a population that adds up to almost 1 million different New Yorkers who are living here, working here, paying taxes here, but are not able to have a voice in local elections or decide who will be able to represent them and make decisions for them. So it's would apply to green card holders and other individuals who are here on a working visa or legally in different ways. And the focus is really to give them the ability to vote in our local elections.
Yeah, and you got 27 co-signers, you said, on that one?
Yes. Yes.
Are you getting a lot of opposition and pushback?
There's some that are obviously Councilmember Rodriguez and others have been really amazing advocates for it. But there is some pushback. We're hoping that there will be a hearing scheduled shortly to have a vote on it. But there is some resistance. But I think overall, the majority of people really support it. And we're hopeful that that will pass soon, and there will be a larger electorate for the upcoming mayoral elections.
Leah, I know also you talk about the Civic Matters initiative and actually what are the components of the program, because I want to be able to give people an opportunity to know a little bit more about all the great work that you're doing. And this is a great project here.
Yeah, so Civic Matters is our new signature program initiative that's designed to expand more opportunities for women to become actively engaged in civic life. It has 4 different pieces that we will be rolling out over the course of the next few years. The first, which is actually starting later this month, is a community workshop series, and the first one will be focused on voting. And those workshops are in partnership with different community organizations, providing information on various topics related to civic engagement. The next part of the Civic Matters program is that we're working to create an online platform and hub that will be kind of a go-to place for different resources about civic engagement, where you can learn a lot of different ways to get involved. You can access information and figure out how you want to be involved. The third part is a Women's Leadership Institute that we're working on in partnership with CUNY. And the last part is a fellowship that will be in partnership with Coro. And that will be like a 6-month fellowship with a cohort based, where women can really sort of pick a topic more specifically to delve into and advocate. And the goal of the program is really to be able to meet women where they are. So you can attend a 1-hour workshop, you can go online to find resources, or you can engage in a deeper way by being a part of this fellowship. And so as I said, meeting people at different levels.
I want to talk about the election for a bit coming around the corner. As we know that, this election probably is going to be one of the most historic elections that will go down in American history. So talk to me, Dayanna, about how do you feel this is a different one? I mean, when you talk about it being totally different, and then also as a voter, what are some of the things that I really need to keep in mind as I approach the polls?
Absolutely. Thank you, Daren. As you said, this is a historical, unprecedented election. There are 3 main ways that voters can select to vote. And it's so important that our families and our neighborhoods are ready to have a plan that they feel most comfortable with because of the pandemic. New Yorkers, again, must do their research and plan together. There are 3 main ways to vote for this upcoming election on November 3rd, by absentee ballot, by mail. There's also early in-person voting throughout all of our 5 boroughs, and also in person during the election. Absentee ballots must be requested by October 27th. If you're concerned about long lines on the election day, you can also cast your ballot early from October 24th to November 1st. If you go in person on November 3rd, we are encouraging everyone to, of course, wash your hands, maintain social distancing, wear a mask. So there's a lot of concerns about health that are in everyone's minds right now, but it's important that everyone knows that there are options that they can share with their families and neighbors, that they can decide as to what they're most comfortable with. But we want to make sure that people feel encouraged to make their voices heard, especially women, especially families and neighbors, to make this a community affair. Experts are saying that there is about the same risk of going to the polls as to going to the grocery store. So everyone should make the choice that they feel most comfortable with.
Well, we do know people are going to the grocery store, so hopefully they'll actually turn out and go to the polls as well. Give me this while I still have you. You talked about voting. Talk to me about the census, and why is it so important for people to really take part in the census?
Absolutely. Census is about money, power, respect. A low response of people coming out to fill out their census means that New York will lose congressional seats and essential federal funding for everything from schools to healthcare to programming for women and girls. Actually, for every New Yorker who is not counted, the state will lose $3,750 per resident per year
Mm.
for the next 10 years. So the decision to fill out your census will impact your community and the livelihoods and the investments in our neighborhoods for a decade. I will encourage, if you haven't filled out your census, to go to 2020census.gov, that you can do it electronically. I personally reached out to my family, seniors, my neighbors, and said, hey, if you haven't filled it out, I'll help you do it. It takes about 2 minutes.
It only takes a couple of seconds, and hopefully people will take advantage of it. So many times when it comes to the census, we do get weak turnout for a lot of different reasons. Hopefully 2020 is the difference maker with regards to that. I want to talk about women creating change, Leah, and give people an opportunity if they want to become a part. Because you talk about a lot of the advocacy work, which entails getting supporters and partners and things of that nature. What can people do to get connected with your work?
Yeah, thank you. We would love for people to get connected and to get involved. I think the easiest way at first is to go visit our website, which is wccny.org. There you can sign up to receive our newsletter, which we send out once a month, that has a lot of different information on ways to get involved, ways to take action. We're really focused on trying to provide ways for people to take action and to have an impact. So that's one way. You can also follow us on social media. We're on all the different platforms. And I'd also recommend checking out our YouTube channel, which now has recordings of some of our most recent events. So anyone can watch those or attend our Census Ambassador training and find different ways to get involved. But we definitely welcome people to join us.
Yeah. And if somebody says, what do you have coming around the corner? How can I get involved? What would you tell them?
I would say we have a voting workshop coming up, and we'll be advertising some Get Out the Vote efforts. So we would love involvement on that. We have some other events that we're working on down the line on some topics related to voting still and census. Those are some of the key things, but we have a lot of exciting things that we're working on right now.
Yeah. Well, ladies, I want to thank you so much for being with us here on the Social Justice Forums and having the opportunity to share a little bit about your organization. And of course, we want people to also stay connected and get connected to you. So thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yes. Well, I want to tell them both thank you for coming and sharing with us on this segment. But guess what? We still have more show coming up. We don't want you to go anywhere. We're going to take a quick break and have more on the Social Justice Forums.
Who's most at risk for coronavirus? People over 65, people with underlying medical conditions like heart disease, chronic lung disease, asthma, diabetes, people undergoing cancer treatment, and people with weakened immune systems. What should you do if you or a loved one is at higher risk? Avoid close contact with people, avoid crowds, stay home if you can, wash your hands frequently. Learn more ways to protect yourself and others at coronavirus.gov.
Our next guest actually helps expand opportunities for people who are living with mental health concerns to recover from trauma, discrimination through affordable housing, training, advocacy, and also healing-focused services. Currently, the NYPD has slow response to individuals in crisis and has a track record of using excessive and too often fatal force, particularly to individuals who are Black or other persons of color. The protests, which have emanated across American cities in response to the murder of George Floyd, along with others, together with the larger movement for Black lives, have also amplified calls to defund the police and reallocate resources towards services that would better meet the needs of Black Americans and over-policed communities nationwide. Our next guest shares her point of view on the matter. I'm joined by the Advocacy Coordinator at Community Access, Carla Rabinowitz. And Carla, good to have you.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to be here.
Yes. And so I want to talk about this because when we, and it's a very important issue because when we talk about mental health and social justice, the two go hand in hand. And I think someone would say on the outside who may not be so familiar with the issue, how mental health and social justice go together. But I'll let you start there. From your perspective, how do you feel like mental health and social justice go together?
So, I haven't really said this on many interviews, but the rights of people with mental health are linked to the rights of people who are Black and the Black Lives Matter movement and people who are Latino and people who are immigrants and everybody else, gay people, trans people, because people with mental health are in all these different communities, right? Also, when we look at the people who are dying at the hands of the police, more and more it's people who are Black, people who are Latino, and that's how it all goes together. But I think more importantly, the police are not the right responders to people in distress in any community. When you're in distress and there's no mental health resources, you call the police. And in most communities, there is no urgent mental health community, so you call the police. In communities of color, there's even less healthcare opportunities for people. So they're waiting till someone gets sick and then they're calling the police. And the police were never meant to handle mental health crisis. I always say it's like sending a plumber to do heart surgery. It's a healthcare need. It's not a command and control law enforcement need.
When we talk about NYPD response, particularly to those with mental health cases and mental health challenges, I know that you've been very vocal and very forthright. Give us what you're finding with regards to the NYPD response to mental health.
So when we started this coalition, Community Access leads a coalition called CCIT-NYC, Correct Crisis Intervention Today. And when we started early on, we were thinking, maybe if we just train the police, maybe if we can just teach them for 40 hours how to be compassionate, how to handle these scenarios, things would be better. And the training was good in 2015. We got it accomplished. But what we found out is a year later, more people were dying than ever before. So from 2015 to 2020, 16 people in New York City alone died in police encounters, 14 of whom were Black. That was after 15,000 officers were trained. If you look at the years past, 2007 to 2014, less than half, only 7 died. So what we realized is training the police doesn't work. 40 hours of training is not enough to counter 4 years of their approach to life, which is to shout at people, to command and control, to draw their guns. It's just not the right approach. We want a healthcare team approach, and that doesn't exist now. You can't call up even New York City Well and say, can you send me some healthcare workers because my son is acting out? It just doesn't exist right now.
Right. And I was having this conversation on another platform recently. We were talking about when the NYPD is dispatched out for a call. They're trained in law enforcement, not really familiar with mental health. And when they do, they engage from a law enforcement perspective. And even though they're trained to de-escalate, many times that doesn't always end up being the case. Would it help to have mental health professionals in these police cars as they're going around the city?
So the thing is, a lot of people are thinking like, well, maybe we'll just add a mental health responder to the police and have what they call co-response, a police and a mental health team worker. That is not the right solution. And I'll tell you why. The people who started, the officers who started CIT training internationally, CIT International, just the mere presence of a police officer is still going to get people scared. It's still the best outcome is to have someone taken in handcuffs to a hospital, which is not the right approach. Your neighbors are still going to know that police came and there's going to be discussion. Well, we put a proposal together years ago for CCIT NYC and is getting a lot of traction.
Mhm.
is to have a person with lived experience who's trained in de-escalation and an EMT. It's much like the model in Eugene, Oregon, where they've been working for 33 years, where they have a trained de-escalator and an EMT go out to calls. They haven't had one serious incident of violence to their workers. They only need the police 0.6% of the time. And there are other models that are working now, San Francisco, Toronto, Los Angeles, Portland. They're all going to a model of one peer, one clinician. Peer is someone with lived experience, one clinician and one EMT. The EMT is there for if you have wounds that they need to take care of. The whole goal is not to transfer people to a psychiatric hospital, which in itself can be very traumatizing, um, but to either treat people at the home or take them to a center where you can get some care, but it's not, a hospitalization.
Yeah. I'm gonna ask the question then. When he's called out all those cities, and we have that report of Eugene, Oregon, and we see these numbers that are really looking very good in Eugene, I guess the question is, why can't we do it here in New York?
No, it's a great question. And I get that a lot from people, a lot of people say, they said that the same thing with CIT. New York City is different when we tried to get that in the first place. And they're saying that the same now. New York City is different. But I want to let you know there's a little known program in New York City. It's in the area of Queens, New York, around the Creedmoor Hospital, which is a hospital there. There's some mental health clinics. There's some housing providers who aren't really able to deal with a person in crisis that high. They couldn't get the EMT funded, so they got one peer and one clinician, very small, one car. And they've handled 3,000 cases since December 2017. They have a 6-minute response time, and they've only needed to transport people to the hospital 3% of the time. And the police in that precinct got so excited a year after they started that the police were handing out the cards. It's totally private. It's not connected to the police.
Mhm.
So we can do it. It's just anything new is scary. People are used to calling the police, but it just doesn't work. I mean, it's not only people are dying, but I hear story after story of people being dragged out of their apartment, people being dragged out of the library, just because as soon as the police hear a person has a mental health concern, it's in their regulations that they have to take the person to a hospital. And the stigma around mental health is so bad in the police. It's so bad. You can't say you're a mental health recipient and then get the same treatment.
Mhm.
Often people who want to report a crime with a mental health concern come to me and say the police won't take my statement. So, police are not the answer. This is a mental health concern. There is a role for police, right? Violent crime. Yes, there's a role for police. But when someone's freaking out and is unwell mentally, it's just like if they had a liver condition. We need a health team response. We need someone who knows how to deal with situation to calm them down. Hey, do you want a bottle of water? Hey, I hear you're having a problem with your neighbor. You had a bad day, things are not going well, let me talk to you, instead of on the ground. It just doesn't work.
Right.
It's just not a law enforcement issue, it's a health care issue.
So how do we break down the stereotype? How do we deal with the issue of, listen, you know what? There is this perception, and then there's also this reaction. And maybe you could tackle both for me. Talk to me about the perception and how we can counter the reaction.
Well, I think we have to separate the two, right? In
Right.
terms of stigma, all the people recently who've been coming out that have mental health concerns, spits I've got his name wrong. All the people who are coming out are great. I myself live with a mental health concern. I own a co-op. I got a law license. I'm doing very well. But I'm one person. But every person in their family who has mental health concerns to come out to other people in their family, in their job, it's hard. It's hard. But then you got to separate into the police situation. I thank God for the people on the street who are doing the protesting, because they're bringing attention not only to the poor policing in communities of color, but in the mental health community. We have to remove the police from this issue. They were never meant to be healthcare workers. They're not healthcare workers. They know law enforcement. They know crime. They know arrest. They don't know how do you make a person feel better. That's not their job. And we got to move that. We just got to move that out of their hands.
Yeah. A pretty hard move. I think when you've done it for a long period of time. And then we also see the systemic issues that actually fall out in association with this. I know you talked about you got a lot of traction, right, on some of the great work that you're doing. Talk to me about what do you think it's going to take to push some things over the edge in your favor?
So we are talking to a couple politicians. No, we've been working with a lot of politicians. Um, and I foresee this happening in the next couple of years. It's just really a matter of time. I think what has to happen is people have to understand when we say redirecting police funding to healthcare workers, we're not saying we want to get rid of police. We're not an abolitionist group. What we're saying is, there's a large number, there's 200,000 police calls that don't need to be police calls. There's 200,000 times when a mother, a son, a father is calling, a neighbor is calling. What if there was a healthcare response? Once people get to acknowledge that that's okay, that it's okay to call a healthcare team instead of police, then the politicians are going to fall in line. You know, 200,000 times the police are responding a year, 200,000 times to someone who needs health care. And I think people just have to, the more people in the city realize that's not the right response to the police. That's not their job. That's a healthcare job. The more we have that kind of understanding that healthcare crisis, when someone's screaming in the street, that's a healthcare crisis, you know?
Yeah.
Um, I think that'll push them over, but I'm very hopeful that the politicians we're working with will understand.
We hope so. I mean, obviously, it's a conversation that needs to be had. I think more and more people are becoming more and more informed and aware about the whole mental health crisis that's actually affecting not just New Yorkers, but really it's a nationwide problem, and it's affecting so many people. Give me this, Carol. When we talk about awareness, do you think that many people are really aware of the issues? I think about HIV and AIDS, right? It took a long time to really debunk a lot of the myths and the stereotypes that are associated with HIV and AIDS. When you take it from a mental health perspective, still a lot of myths and stereotypes do exist. Are we doing a good job in terms of debunking a lot of these myths and stereotypes now?
I think it's hard. It's like any other community, but it's different. I can't explain why, but I feel comfortable talking about the fact that I have a mental health concern because I work for an agency that promotes people who have mental health concerns, right? But in the workforce, if you come out to your boss and say, I'm just not feeling well today, I'm feeling poor mentally, I'm feeling a little under emotional distress, I think I'm going to go home. No one respects that. No one respects that. A mental health concern is just like any other concern, but it's so taboo. It's still so taboo. Even with all these actors and people coming out, it has to be more in the common everyday person saying, hey, you got to respect the fact that I'm feeling depressed today. And that's a hard thing for a person to do. You don't want to lose your job. You don't want to lose your family relation, your girlfriend, so you don't want to say that. But the more we talk about it, just like any other community, the more we discuss what's happening, the better things will be.
I think about like mental health from the perspective you talked about depression. A lot of people deal with depression. A lot of people have emotional issues. And the bottom line is, yeah, if my foot is hurt, I'm going to the foot doctor. If my knee's hurting, I'm going to the ortho. But when it comes to mental health, it's almost like I can't report that. I can't say that because, there's so many things that are associated with that can really have an adverse effect on my life. But talk to us about that need for, therapy and even those who are dealing with that issue. Therapy is real. And in some circles, it's very embraced. In other circles, it's very much shunned.
Yeah, I mean, I think however a person deals with their mental health concern, the main thing is we have to talk about it. Families have to talk about it. You have to talk about it at work. There are resources. There's New York City Well, we can get you a therapist, but you have to be willing to go. And it can't be just limited to people going to therapy and getting health care because it's a different kind of thing. It's so taboo in society. If we want things to change, you're going to need to start talking about it at work. you're going to need to start talking about it when you apply for your license, a law license or whatever. Because right now, every time you want to do something and you say you have a mental health concern, that's it. You're in another corner and you can't get that co-op. You can't do the things you want to do. I'm fortunate that I was able to do all that, but most people can't. And it's scary. It's scary to say, I have a mental health concern.
Yeah. Before we get out of here, I want to give you an opportunity to share a little bit about how people can get connected to some of the work that you're doing, some of the advocacy and the policy that you're working with, and how people can be a partner in your conversation.
Great. So if you want to if you're interested at all involved in how we move police out of the realm of responding to mental health crisis and figure out how to get a health team response, you can go to www.ccitnyc.org and go to our contact page. Or if you're interested in supportive housing, helping people with mental health concerns get into housing that builds them with supports, you can go to communityaccess.org and learn all about what we do. And we'd love for you to join us in anything we do.
Well, thank you so much for sharing with us, Carla. I think it's a great conversation that needs to continue to be had across our community as we deal with the issue of mental health awareness, and particularly with the NYPD. And once again, for a viewer that's actually out there, it's not really talking about defunding the police. No, it's not defunding. It's really about reallocating. And
yes.
Carla, you got to come back at another
Wait,
time.
One more second.
Yeah.
I forgot to tell you all about stigma. I'm so tired today.
Okay.
We're having a mental health film festival in December. This is our 15th year. It's virtual. It doesn't cost you anything. When you go to the Community Access website or just put in New York City Mental Health Film Festival and learn about our film festival, all wonderful films, fun, exciting, not depressing, and it's all free in December.
All right. You got it in. Great job. Carla, thanks so much for being with us. You got to come back.
Thank you so much.
All right, Carla is our guest here on the Social Justice Forum. We encourage you to stay connected. You found the way that you can actually connect with her. It's listed at the bottom of your screen. And then, of course, we invite you to stay connected to us. We're going to take a quick break. We've got more of the Social Justice Forum when we return right after this.
We know that people are dealing with the health crisis, but there's also a lot of food insecurity.
We're giving out healthy food options, and that's what's key here.
If you're a senior, you have a disability, they'll actually deliver meals to you.
The residents are anxious, they're worried, they're scared, they want to be tested.
When things were happening in our community and we couldn't get the help.
There's almost a presumption of criminality that attaches to your skin color.
The site will prioritize those who are at highest risk in the population.
If you feel symptoms and you'd like to visit one of these COVID-19 testing sites here in the Bronx, you may call the State Health Department's hotline.
Important to note about this site is no reservations are needed. This is a walk-in clinic.
A lot of us are out of work and looking for something to do.
We have the machinery and the skills to make large scale of these masks and gowns.
Take care of your people. It's going to go way further than we actually can understand.
Right now, employees like myself are just adjusting to the new reality.
Reporting from BronxNet, this is Torres.
We built a media network for you.
BronxNet TV.
Come learn in your new state-of-the-art studios at Lehman College.
At Mercy College.
And coming soon to the South Bronx in the Hub.
Inspire with your stories, culture, history.
Your Bronx on BronxNet.
Engage with us.
Connect with us at your channels and at BronxNet.tv.
Learn, engage, inspire. BronxNet TV.
From the Bronx
to the world.
BronxNet.
And welcome back. While democratic participation can take place in many forms, including organizing our communities, advocating for issues, and protesting unjust policies and systems, the act of voting is one of the most important tools for ensuring our elected leaders reflect our communities and values and govern our interests. Unfortunately, ensuring that every such person can vote remains an elusive goal in our democracy. Every election, large numbers of eligible voters are denied their fundamental right to vote due to imprisonment or being on parole. Registration barriers do not affect communities equally. Voter registration today disproportionately blocks Black and brown would-be voters from exercising their fundamental right to vote. Joining us now to provide her point of view on this matter, I'm joined by the Senior Counsel at Demos, Naila Awan, and thank you so much for being with us, Naila.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, and so as we talk about, November, which is literally right around the corner. I know you're fastened and locked right in on it. Give us your thoughts about what you see and what you want to see happen as we move closer to that date.
Yeah, I mean, I think as we're looking towards November, there's obviously an enormous amount of litigation that's happening right now, an enormous number of rules that are in question, and people who are going to be navigating the absentee voting processes for the first time. So, I think that my main hope heading into November is one, that folks are requesting their ballots early, that they are checking to make sure that they are received if they're sending them in by mail, and that there's not deficiencies in them. And then also, there's a huge amount of work right now that's happening to try to get poll worker recruitment in different states, because that is what we saw led to the consolidation of polling locations and enormously long lines during the primaries. And so that is another thing that, kind of stands at top of mind with respect to this November's election and how it's going to play out.
Yeah, and we know that even as we're getting closer, the voter registration deadline is fast approaching, but a little bit about your efforts and your thoughts about voter registration.
Sure. So, I heard you mention earlier about how voter registration serves as a barrier, particularly for certain communities, particularly Black and brown communities. And the thing is, it's not a coincidence, right? It was designed that way. The first voter registration procedures really began to be adopted in the late 19th century in response to increases in immigration and the enfranchisement of former slaves. And so, this year in particular, as we're seeing people face an eviction crisis where their addresses might be changing, as we're seeing the fact that grassroots organizations that tend to really conduct GOTV in Black and brown communities have been stalled from being able to do the sort of on-the-ground efforts like they normally do because of the COVID-19 pandemic. I think, now more than ever, it's important for people to be checking their registration status and registering to vote or updating their registration if needed. Something that we've seen time and time again is a lot of times people think I'm registered in this state and that's all I need to worry about. But actually, if you've moved, you do have to have your registration updated so that you can vote at your new address. Otherwise, you're potentially subjecting yourself to disenfranchisement based on where you move to within a state. And those laws differ from one state to the next, but it's just incredibly important to make sure that your registration is updated and current before the voter registration deadline hits.
Yeah, and as we know, for many people, we have to overcome these barriers, particularly communities of color, and we know that there's a lot of voter suppression that's going on out there. Talk a little bit about your work in dealing with that, the issue of voter suppression, and really having access to ballot voting.
Sure. So, I mean, we've seen voter suppression issues pop up in any number of circumstances. And, a few of the things that I've personally worked on have dealt with things like the elimination or attempted elimination of early voting opportunities, such as evening and weekend hours, which people who tend to be hourly and wage workers or who don't have flexible work schedules rely on to be able to vote. Or the targeting of Sunday voting, which a lot of Black churches have organized around for Souls to the Polls to take their congregations to go vote. And there have been concentrated efforts in some states over the past number of years to try to eliminate some of those opportunities. Similarly, things like the consolidation of polling places that tend to happen predominantly in Black and brown communities, or disproportionately happen in those communities, mean that people who might have been able to walk to their polling place at one point now might have to drive to it. And when you're looking at the fact that in a number of states, if you look at the data, people who are in communities of color tend to be less likely to own a vehicle or less likely to have a vehicle for each like member of their family who drives. That can be like, or is of driving age, that could be an enormous burden as well. You know, then if you think about things like the impact that has on lines at polling locations and people's ability to wait in those lines, or the fact that like voter ID laws tend to also disproportionately disenfranchise Black and brown voters, those all kind of compound on what some of these voter suppression efforts are. And one of the other issues that has really seen a resurgence in recent years is the issue of voter purges. And what I would say about that is, one, in places like Ohio, where we litigated, the state uses inactivity over a period of time to indicate that a voter may have moved and start a process of removing them from the registration rolls. But when people have a number of factors that are already reducing the likelihood that they are able to make it to the polls and cast a ballot, disproportionately Black and brown people, what that means is that those individuals are more likely to be swept up into that process and removed from the rolls, despite the fact that their eligibility did not change. Then you also see targeting of like predominantly Black communities for purges. For instance, in 2015 in Sparta, Georgia, you had the Hancock County Board of Elections decide to send out deputies with summonses to, I think it was about 17% of the population in the city of Sparta, telling them they had to appear and defend their registration status in order to stay on the registration rolls. And almost every single one of the people who was provided those summonses was Black.
One of the things we're also dealing with too is the issue of getting some clarity, because one of the, you know, demographics that we have to talk about with regards to voting are particularly those who've been incarcerated and those with felonies. A lot of misconception. Can you please clear it up? Who's allowed to vote? Who's not allowed to vote when it comes to parole and probation?
So here's the problem, is that it differs enormously from one state to another. And what the general assumption is by individuals is that if you've had a felony conviction in your past, that you're permanently barred from being able to vote. And the reason is that people are most familiar with the most restrictive rules like that used to exist in Florida, despite the fact that in their state, perhaps they can vote immediately upon releasing from incarceration, right? It really differs from state to state. Some states, you know, permanently bar someone from voting. Some states say upon completion of probation or parole. Some states say upon release from incarceration. Some say upon completion of terms of sentence, which could mean the payment of certain legal financial obligations. Others might actually have different rules based on the felony that you may have been convicted for, or if it was a first felony conviction versus a second felony conviction. So it's really this like patchwork of rules that creates a lot of voter confusion. And I would say too that here as well, these practices were not, you know, they don't by coincidence disproportionately disenfranchise Black and brown voters. They were actually a response to the abolition of property holding requirements designed to reduce the political participation of Black voters. So if you actually look at how some of these laws developed in the South, right? For instance, in the state of Mississippi, they targeted crimes that Black voters were more likely to be prosecuted for than white voters. So if someone committed murder, something that white voters were more likely to be prosecuted for, they retain their right to vote. If they committed an act of theft, something Black voters were more likely to be convicted for, they lost their voting rights. And really, if you look today, there are 2 states out of the US's 50 states that never strip an individual of their right to vote, regardless of felony conviction, and they remain able to vote while in prison. And those 2 states are Maine and Vermont, something that I think is not a coincidence that they are also the ones, if you look at census block data or census data, are the 2 whitest states in the country.
So now, give me this. I mean, we've got a lot of challenges as we head towards November. Of course, a lot of obstacles to try to overcome. The major obstacle that everybody's talking about and we've got to deal with is the one that hits us front and center, which is COVID-19 and the impact of COVID-19, particularly in communities of color, and then also not just in communities of color, but just literally state and nationwide. How do we see COVID-19 potentially playing an impact in the voter turnout?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's something that we all have reason to be concerned about. You know, one, there's already the item we hit earlier about the fact that registration efforts were halted in a lot of communities. And so the impact that has on the ability of individuals to vote is direct, right? If they aren't registered, they're not going to be able to vote. So that could depress numbers. You're also looking at an election where for the first time, a lot of people are going to be trying to vote remotely by like absentee or mail ballot. And the studies show that people who are first-time voters, who are Black voters, are more likely to have their absentee ballots rejected for errors. And I think, you know, based on my experience working with a number of grassroots organizations, a lot of Black-led grassroots organizations have indicated their members and the communities they work with oftentimes go to vote in person because they like to see the ballot being counted and cast. And they, you know, it's something that folks have had to struggle and work to achieve that right. And they like to go and exercise it in person. So you're having like a number of people who are not used to having to navigate these mail voting processes that are going to have to do so for the first time this year, when really even minor errors on these ballots can result in rejection. And not all states require that individuals be provided notice and an opportunity to correct those errors. So, you know, that is deeply problematic. I think it was a study by USA Today, Columbia Journalism Investigations, and PBS Frontline that said that taking kind of a low threshold, if 50% of our nation votes by mail, they're estimating that at least 1.03 million absentee ballots could be rejected in this election.
And that's huge, given the fact that, first of all, the numbers last time, and when we look at the numbers last time, of course, President Trump winning in the popular vote, but yet and still winning, I mean, losing in the popular vote, winning in the Electoral College. And then you also have the statistic where 53% of eligible American voters did not hit the polls. Are we looking at voter apathy this time around, or do you think that people are going to be very more engaged based on the fact of all that we're seeing across our nation?
You know, I think it's hard to predict exactly what's going to happen, because I definitely think that people are concerned about the COVID-19 pandemic. At the same point, we're not having the level of engagement around the presidential debates and election that you normally have when you're not in the midst of a pandemic. But we are in a very specific moment in our country where folks have been mobilized. You know, there is a massive grassroots movement happening right now, and there is, I think, real concerns about how this election is going to play out, as well as I feel like the fact that voter suppression efforts have been so frontline in the news right now actually could motivate people more to say, like, no, you're not going to take my vote away, and I'm going to exercise it. So my hope is that we see higher turnout. I think that, you know, it's still to be seen, though.
Yeah. What can be done if we're looking at our current electoral process, helping out, particularly in communities of color? What do you think would be of great advantage to communities of color in a time such as this when we talk about voting?
Well, so if we're talking about this election coming up, you know, I will say I think that having more people volunteer with like election protection who are from different communities, like from the communities they're actually assisting people in, is like enormously helpful. And the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law does a nonpartisan election protection like effort that folks could look into volunteering at. I think needing more poll workers from like communities is also going to be big and important to helping folks, and like having someone that you know, is from a community or who may speak the language that someone who's visiting a polling site speaks can be enormously helpful in helping people navigate the voting process. And then if we're talking about like, you know, what reforms are needed and stuff too, I think that there are a number of things like that that are like longer term solutions, such as making sure that there's like same day registration, which a number of states have already, where you can go to the polls, register to vote or update your registration and vote in person, right? And it's kind of a one-stop voting shop. And I think that things like that are enormously important to ensuring that one, individuals aren't disenfranchised based on their registration not being up to date or because they've been purged from the rolls or for a variety of other reasons.
If I get to the polls and I say, listen, you know, I'm here to cast my vote, but then I've got an election worker, a polling worker telling me, no, I can't do that here, or there's some sort of controversy. What are the options that's available? We've heard advocates say, stay at the polls, cast your ballot, and then at the same time, we'll work it out later.
Yeah, I mean, so I will say, I think that one, you can always like contact election protection. There is a national hotline, 866-R-VOTE, that folks can call and seek assistance with if they're experiencing any difficulties. Also, everyone has a right to cast a provisional ballot. And sometimes poll workers don't actually like offer that up. I know people who have been told their names aren't on the registration rolls and are never offered a provisional ballot, but everyone should insist at the very least to be handed a provisional ballot at the polling site if they're being told they cannot otherwise vote.
So what's it going to be like for you over the next couple of weeks as we get closer towards Election Day? Talk about the work that you'll be doing over the next couple of weeks.
Sure. So right now we're kind of knee deep in a lawsuit in Missouri dealing with how individuals are going to be able to return their mail-in ballots in the state, dealing with certain restrictions that the state has placed on mail-in voters. And that is on a fast track appeal at the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals. The district court found in our favor on one of the issues last Friday, and we're already getting ready for 8th Circuit litigation to hopefully resolve the issues as soon as possible so that voters know what options are available for them to return their ballots well in advance of November 3rd.
And for somebody who doesn't know about your organization, real quick, give us a little bit about your organization.
Sure. Demos is a national nonprofit that focuses on democracy and economic justice with a focus on racial equity. So all of our work seeks to address issues that disproportionately impact Black and Brown voters and Black and Brown individuals. And we have a litigation team, a campaigns team, a policy and research team, and a communications team, and really utilize all of those prongs to work to advance progressive reforms and do that in deep partnership with local grassroots organizations that work at the state and local levels.
Well, thank you so much for coming and sharing today, Naila, about the work that's going on. And certainly as we get closer towards Election Day, a lot is going to be hanging in the balance. But we certainly want to make sure that our viewers are aware of all the things that they can do to make sure they have their vote counted. And most of all, the people really get out to vote. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
All righty. Well, we want to thank all of our guests for joining us here on the Social Justice Forums. We're out of time, but want to tell you that you can always catch us here on BronxNet's Channel 67, Verizon Files Channel 2133, where we continue to deepen our understanding as well as promote civic engagement in and on social justice matters. For all of us here on the show, I'm Daren Jaime saying take care, God bless. We'll talk to you soon, and don't forget, exercise your right to vote. We can't tell you who to vote for, but we can tell you to exercise your right to go out and vote. Take care.